Thank you, Jade. Wow. Sometimes good to get carried away, huh? Yeah. Getting carried away by love. That's something that could change the whole world. Yeah. Amen. Oh, we got the amen girl in the front row. Good plan. I put her there this morning because she loves to say amen. Amen? You could say it too. Well, we're talking today about one of our core values called inclusiveness, I guess would be the proper word. And we have a number of core values here at Unity of Santa Barbara. And what is a core value but something which would be that which, no matter what would happen, no matter what we would be dealing with here in this community, those values would be that which we would hold to. You know, those are the non-negotiables, you might say, in an organization. And so the one I want to talk to you today about is an inclusiveness, and I think we probably all agree that it's up in the world. I mean, it's always been up, but I think it's up more than ever in my remembrance, which isn't all that good, actually, but that's another story for another time. So inclusive, what we say, their statement is, we honor and welcome everyone. We honor and welcome everyone. And I certainly affirm and hope that that's people's experience when they come in here. We'll talk a little bit more about that later at the end of my message about how we can do that. But I wanted to say more in a spiritual context where that comes from, this idea of being inclusive, because like so many things that we raise up as an ideal, it can feel like what it is, it's something that you should do, you know, that it arises from some sort of a moral obligation or some kind of an ethical imperative that is behind it. And what I want us to know and to hear today, if you hear nothing else, is that inclusiveness does not come secondarily to who we are as something that we try to adopt as a behavior. But inclusivity arises as a result of the very nature of what we are, that it flows from what we are. And that's a huge distinction, because one notion of it would be external. One would be that well, there's I am, and then there's something I should be doing, where there's a separation between the being and the behavior. And what I'm suggesting here is that the kind of inclusiveness that we're talking about is the authentic sense of connection, of the spiritual reality of our being, which we all share. And that in that very truth of that, we are all included. Does that make sense? Certainly did this morning when I was meditating on it. I hope it translates. And there's a story about it sort of introduces us to this idea of this nature from the Upanishads that I wanted to share with you today. And it's a father who's talking to his son, and his son has turned 12. And he says, you know, now that you're 12 years old, you must go off and you must study and spend time with the rishis and the Vedic scholars and fill yourself up with all of this great knowledge. And so he dutifully goes, as he is supposed to do. And he comes back after many months, and he's all full of himself, you know. He's got it all figured out. You know, he's learned everything that he needs to learn, and he's a little bit, you know, kind of conceited and arrogant and sharing with his father everything he knows. And his father says, well, that's all wonderful. You know, you've heard about, you've got the astrology and the stars, and you've learned about the herbs and the medicine and the rituals and so forth. But tell me, son, did they say anything to you? Did they teach you about that which cannot be seen, or that which cannot be heard, or that which cannot be known? Because out of that which all things that are seen, heard, and known arise from. And the son said, no, they didn't teach me that. He said, well, I think they probably would have taught me that if they knew that. Will you share that with me, Father? And so the father said yes. And so the father begins this very long teaching to his son. And he uses this metaphor. There's two pots sitting there. And he says, both of these pots that you see here are made of clay. And they're very different. as you can see. They're different in size and in shape and in color, but they're both made of clay. And when we look at these pots, we can be very much aware of what they look like, and their size and their shape. But do we see the clay? His son says no. He says, well, it's important for us to recognize that no matter what happens with these pots, they will still be, their essence will be of clay. He says, when you understand the essence of clay, you understand all things that are made of clay. And he says, you know, if you understand your essence, you will understand the essence of everything. And I think this is just a very beautiful pointer to what is the essence of the spiritual life, is for you and I to become familiar with that which cannot be seen or cannot be heard, cannot be known, but out of which all that is seen and heard and known arises. This is the essence of you and I. And in this essence of our very being, there is no distinctions between anybody. The very basis of spirituality is inclusiveness. Because the opposite of inclusivity is what? Exclusivity, right? Exclusiveness. Which comes from physicality. As soon as you have physicality, you have boundaries. Yes? Do we understand that? As soon as we have physicality, we have boundaries. Before we have physicality, in the spiritual realm, there are none. And so, our work on the spiritual path is to become meta-physical, is to go beyond the physical, which means to go beyond the boundaries. And when we go beyond the boundaries, we come right back to the essence of what we are. And when we're in the consciousness of the essence of who we are and what we are, there are no boundaries. It's only when we contract upon that sense of our spiritual nature that we create a world. We create a physical world, and we create physical boundaries. And I become an I. This I becomes the one that's encapsulated within this flesh. That's this I. And then your I is all that which is encapsulated in you. And then I just feel that, you know, that everything on this side, the inside of the skin, is me, and everything on the outside of it is other. And that's something we have to realize. That is not the deepest truth of our nature. That is something that happened secondarily to us being made in the image and likeness. Yes? And that because we made that journey away, which, you know, sort of metaphorically is like walking out of the Garden of Eden, since we made that journey away by perception, by belief, we can walk our way back. That the spiritual life is first and foremost a return to the awareness of our metaphysical nature, where we are boundaryless. And then when we're talking about inclusiveness, we don't have to sit there and say, well, we need to make some more laws, you know? We need to stop the exclusiveness and the shunning of these people and these religions and these people with this sexual orientation, and we need to create all these sort of rights and obligations of being nice and fair and just with each other. All that is secondary. Am I doing something wrong here, Gary? What's that? It's the unit. Okay, not this unit, but that unit back there. Okay, good. I just want to make sure I think there's a battle here with exclusivity. It's trying to come in and move the energy here. Nobody and nothing is against me. I speak and I stand in the truth of being who I've come here to be. And sometimes there can be static in the line, and we don't necessarily take that in. And when we even intend to be inclusive, and what comes up for me sometimes is old stories, right? And old stories usually have, you know, consequences to something that's happened to us in our life. And if we keep reliving the stories of us and them, of other, and don't question what comes from those stories and the beliefs that we created around them, then we are cementing in the boundaries. We're making the boundaries more real than they fundamentally are, because all boundaries only stay in place by belief. There is no such thing as an actual boundary between anything and anyone. So, I wanted to share something. Jesus said it very simply. You know, the really masterful teachers don't have to say all these words like I do. They just have these one lines. They're like, wow. It's like in mathematics, you know, the best equations are the ones that are the shortest, and the mathematicians are always in competition to kind of keep reducing the formula down to say exactly the same thing with less characters. So I'll just give you about 10 minutes. Here's what Jesus said. Love your neighbor as yourself. And there's one really important word in there. What do you think that word is? As. Of course, love is there, but love your neighbor as yourself. I don't know how many people miss that, you know, of in his time. You know, when Jesus was talking about oneness, you know, the Father and I are one, and I am in you, and you are in me, and we are in God, and all those sort of ideas that we live in the consciousness of this oneness, this love that we are. When he said, love your neighbor as yourself, it was not this dualistic thing of, okay, I'm here and you're there, and I'm going to love you. I'm going to take this love that I have here, and I'm going to send that to you, and then that's my love. It's deeper than that. It's more profound than that. It's when I am in the love that is the infinite love of God, and you are in the love that is the infinite love of God, then then love is happening. And then it's the natural expression of what we are that commingles in the milieu of its nature, and not by some one separate being trying to translate this energy to another. So when someone talks about having their soulmate, you know, really, that can feel that way, right? It can feel like that it's like you don't even have to say it, because you're in the same field, you're in the same vibration. And that's not just for soulmates, not just for romantic relationships, but that is possible for all of us. So Jesus tells this amazing story, which just really knocks not his disciples, but the people that he was talking to, for a loop. He just shocks, he's always shocking people, but this was probably one of the most shocking things that Jesus says when he's trying to talk about who is my neighbor. And he said, love your neighbor as yourself. And then the question comes back, well, who was my neighbor? And so Jesus tells a story of this man who's traveling down this road to Jericho, and the road to Jericho was a twisting, turning, treacherous path where robbers and thieves could hang out and hide. And so this man is taking this trek, and he is assaulted by thieves, and takes everything that he owns, including his clothing, beats him to an inch of his life, and leaves him lying on the side of the road. Jesus is telling the story, and he says, in due course, two men walk by. One comes along, first of all, and he's a priest, a Jewish priest, and he goes to the other side of the street. Not only passes him by, but he goes on the other side of the street and ignores him. And the next person who comes along is a Levite, who's a temple worker, and keeps on going. But then along comes this other man, and this other man, this is where the shock comes in to people who are listening to this story. This other man is a Samaritan. And the Samaritans were shunned by the Jews because they had a different religion. They felt like the Samaritans had abandoned the religion. They had intermarried, so they were like not of the pure breed. And the Samaritans were shunned and hated. So, Jesus could have told this story and put anyone in that place of the one who comes and helps this person who's hurt. But he describes this person as a Samaritan, and the people are listening to the story. I can just imagine they're like, what? And then he proceeds to say what this person does over and over and over again to help this person who is hurting so badly. And it's like one act of compassion and a deeper one and a deeper one, over the top level of compassion. And the people are listening to this and going, it can't be a Samaritan. You must have made a mistake, And Jesus continues to tell the story. And then at the end he says, so who is the neighbor of those three? They are only left with one conclusion. And the conclusion is that their enemy was their neighbor. It was to look beyond the person to see who they really are. To look beyond the boundary, to look beyond the religion, to look beyond all of the stories that have been made up about how that person was separate and should be kept apart and didn't belong, and you would avoid them, and you would just leave them. So Jesus was the great boundary buster. He came to enlighten us from this old idea of a God that, or a notion of God that would accept some and reject others. He came to talk about a God of love and grace and truth and compassion and inclusivity. This was his version of the love of God. And he told the story of the prodigal son and the son who did this most horrendous thing of asking for his inheritance and taking it and running off and spending it all and living just the most obscene sort of life and coming back broke. And the response from the father is this open, loving, welcoming, inclusive heart space for the son. Because there's nothing you can do to interrupt real love. There's no way you can put a boundary between love. You can't put it's antithetical to what love is. What we call love oftentimes is fondness and preference and positive regard for things that we like. But love doesn't come and go. Love is always here. So we all have an invitation. I say this to you, and I know in many ways you know this. In many ways, of course, I know this, but we don't always live it, do we? We don't always embody it. I need to be reminded. So I'm going to leave you with something light. Anyone up for something light? Okay. But it also has a message in it too, so it isn't gratuitous humor. So there's this good old boy, cowboy, he decides to go to this uptown church. And he's wearing jeans and raggedy boots and a worn out old hat. And as the cowboy takes a seat in this very fine church, people move away from him and no one welcomes him. And as the cowboy is leaving the church, the minister approaches him and asks this cowboy to do him a favor. He says, before you come back again, he said, I wondered if you wouldn't talk to God and find out what God says would be appropriate attire for you to wear when you come in our church. So the cowboy assured the preacher that he would do that. And so the next Sunday, the cowboy's back again, and he comes into the service wearing the very same ragged jeans, boots, and the old hat. Once again, he's completely shunned and he's ignored by all the people. So the preacher approaches the man and said, well, I thought I talked to you last week and said to go speak to God before you came back to our church. The old cowboy says, I did. And the preacher says, well, if you spoke to God, what did God tell you would be the proper attire should you be worshiping in here? And he says, well, sir, God told me that she didn't have a clue of what I should wear, seeing as she'd never been in this church. I didn't change it to she. That's how the joke reads, too. So I think we do a really good job here at Unity of Santa Barbara of welcoming people and making people feel welcome. And yet I know that it does happen from time to time. And I just want you to put yourself in this position, because we've all been a new person here. Maybe there are some here today. But to come in and you might experience the service as being wonderful, and you love the music and the message, and you resonate in a lot of things about the place. But then when the service is over, and then you go into the fellowship area of the church, and no one speaks to you. You know, somewhat like the man who's on the road to Jericho. There's a feeling that you're being, not maybe intentionally, but just by a lack of awareness, you're not being included. And how that feels. And it can be so easily avoided. So easily avoided. It's like the simplest thing that you and I can do here, and I include myself in this, is just to make sure that if someone's new here, or if someone's relatively new here, that doesn't mean the first Sunday, but second Sunday, third Sunday, or maybe a period of time where people are not yet engaged in the community, they haven't made connections and relationships and feel comfortable, is to just spend that moment to say good morning and how are you and glad to see you, and engage them in just the simplest of conversations. It could make a world of difference for someone feeling the inclusivity that we intend here at Unity of Santa Barbara. So I ask you to do that, and I ask you to bring that sensitivity, because we are a community that has an awful lot to offer. But if people can't stay because they don't feel that they belong here, they don't feel that they're welcome here, they don't feel connected here, then it doesn't matter everything that we're putting out there, you know, that people won't feel that they belong here. We want people to feel that they belong here. So it's just a shift in awareness that you can have after the service is over, and it'll could make a huge difference between someone feeling isolated and someone feeling connected. So we know that God is alive and well in this church, and we would never want someone to feel that we have abandoned our spiritual principles just because for a moment, we fell asleep to our connection, to the fact that we are all connected, we are all one with each other. Amen? Amen. Thank you for that. Thank you.